Dr. Han Mirai stepped carefully through the white corridors of Research Station Meridian. Her soft shoes made almost no sound on the polished metal floors. At 26 years old, she was the youngest scientist ever sent to work this far from Earth. The other crew members often said she had the gentlest hands in the galaxy when it came to handling alien creatures. The station floated silently in the empty space between two star systems. It was huge, almost like a small city with laboratories and living quarters for over 200 beings from different worlds. Mirai loved working here because she got to study life forms that most humans had never even dreamed of seeing. She walked toward Laboratory 7, where she spent most of her days. Through the clear walls, she could see the soft glow of containment units holding specimens from dozens of different planets. Some creatures swam in tanks of strange-colored water. Others slept in environments that copied their homeworlds perfectly. A few floated in chambers filled with gases that would kill most other life forms instantly. Mirai had a special gift for calming even the most dangerous animals. The other scientists often called her when they could not get close to an aggressive specimen. She would walk up slowly, speaking in soft tones, and somehow the creatures would become peaceful around her. Even the Velkari engineers, who were known for being very practical and unemotional, said she had magic in her voice. The station operated under very strict rules. No weapons were allowed in the research areas. All conflicts had to be solved through talking and compromise. Violence was considered the worst possible failure for any civilized being. The Galactic Coalition had built this place as a symbol of peace between different species who had once fought terrible wars against each other. Mirai loved this peaceful environment. She had never been in a real fight in her entire life. She had never even raised her voice in anger. Her colleagues from other worlds found this amazing, because humans had a reputation for being somewhat aggressive compared to many other species. But Mirai seemed to prove that humans could be just as gentle and caring as any other peaceful race in the galaxy. Today felt different somehow, though she could not explain why. As she entered her laboratory, she noticed that some of the creatures seemed more restless than usual. The shadowlings from the planet Cathara were moving around their containment unit more than normal. These creatures were particularly dangerous because they could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to see or catch. She made notes about their behavior in her daily report. The shadowlings had been collected from a world where everything was designed to hunt and kill. The Coalition had placed them in maximum security containment because even one escaped shadowling could kill dozens of beings before anyone could stop it. But they were important for research because understanding their abilities could help protect other worlds from similar predators. Mirai checked on her other specimens throughout the morning. The crystal spiders from Thylos were building their usual beautiful webs that could cut through most metals. The acid worms from the volcanic planet Helios were sleeping peacefully in their heated chambers. Everything seemed normal except for that strange feeling she could not shake. During lunch break, she sat in the common area with her friend Dr. Lee Jinho, the chief medical officer. Jinho was one of only 3 other humans on the station, and they had become close friends over the past year. He was older than her, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a calm way of speaking that made everyone feel safe. The shadowlings seem agitated today, Mirai told him while eating her meal. I have never seen them move around so much during daylight hours. Jinho nodded thoughtfully. Maybe they sense something we cannot. Animals often know about danger before we do. He paused to take a bite of his food. Have you noticed anything else unusual? Before Mirai could answer, the station's AI system made an announcement. All research staff, please report any unusual specimen behavior to Security Chief Korvac immediately. This is a routine safety check. Mirai and Jinho looked at each other with concern. Routine safety checks usually happened once a week, and they had just had one 3 days ago. Something was definitely not normal. Security Chief Korvac was a massive Bruthan warrior who stood almost 8 feet tall. His species had once conquered many star systems before joining the Coalition peacefully. Despite his frightening appearance with huge muscles and sharp tusks, he was actually very gentle and fair. But when he was worried about something, everyone else should be worried too. After lunch, Mirai returned to her laboratory feeling more uneasy. She tried to focus on her work, cataloging the feeding habits of some new specimens that had arrived last week, but she kept glancing at the shadowling containment unit. The creatures inside seemed to be testing the walls of their prison. pressing against the energy barriers that kept them contained. As the artificial day cycle began to end and the station's lights dimmed to simulate nighttime, Mirai finished her reports and prepared to return to her quarters. She took one last look at all her specimens, making sure they were secure for the night. The shadowlings had finally settled down, but something about their stillness worried her more than their earlier agitation. Walking through the corridors toward her living area, she passed other crew members heading to their quarters. The aquatic Nephilim moved through water-filled tubes that ran alongside the regular hallways. A group of Drakmari scholars discussed their research in voices that sounded like musical chimes. Everything seemed peaceful and normal, but deep in her mind something primitive and ancient was beginning to stir. A part of her human heritage that had been sleeping for generations was slowly waking up. She did not know it yet, but by tomorrow morning, the gentle scientist who could calm any creature would discover that she carried something far more dangerous than any alien predator in her laboratory. The station continued, its quiet orbit through empty space, and Dr. Han Mirai went to sleep thinking about research schedules and specimen feeding times. She had no idea that this would be the last night she would ever think of herself as purely human. In the lower levels of the station, something moved in the shadows between the walls. Something that should have been safely contained was already free, and it was hungry. The emergency alarm woke Mirai from a deep sleep. Red lights flashed through her small quarters as the station's warning system screamed its urgent message. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding as she tried to understand what was happening. All personnel remain in quarters immediately. Security lockdown is now in effect. This is not a drill. Mirai pulled on her clothes and moved to the small window in her room. Through the thick glass, she could see Security Chief Korvac and his team running through the corridors. They carried heavy energy weapons and moved with the quick, careful steps of trained soldiers. The Bruthan warriors looked more serious than she had ever seen them. Something was very wrong. She tried to call Jinho on her communication device, but the system was blocked. All personal communications had been shut down except for emergency channels. The only sounds she could hear were the heavy footsteps of security teams and the distant hum of the station's defensive systems powering up. Minutes passed like hours as Mirai waited in her quarters. She paced back and forth in the small space, trying to think of what could cause such a serious emergency. The station had never had a real crisis in the 3 years it had been operating. The worst incident had been when a crystal spider had escaped from its container, and that had been solved in less than an hour. Then she heard something that made her blood turn cold. Through the walls, she could hear Korvac shouting orders in his native language. Even without understanding the words, she could tell from his tone that he was afraid. If a Bruthan warrior was scared, then everyone else should be terrified. The station's AI system made another announcement, but this time the artificial voice sounded different. Less calm and controlled than usual. Multiple containment breaches detected in Research Level 5. All security teams report to emergency stations. Warning. Several class. Dangerous specimens are no longer contained. Mirai felt her stomach drop. Research Level 5 was where they kept the most dangerous creatures. The shadowlings were stored there, along with acid worms, crystal spiders, and things much worse. If several of those creatures had escaped at the same time, it meant someone or something had deliberately broken them out. She moved back to her window and pressed her face against the glass. The corridor outside was empty now except for the flashing red lights. But as she watched, she saw something that should not have been possible. A section of the wall seemed to ripple like water, and for just a moment she thought she saw a dark shape moving through it. Shadowlings could phase through solid matter when they were hunting. If they were loose in the station, nowhere was truly safe. Her communication device suddenly crackled to life. It was Jinho's voice speaking quickly and quietly. "Mirai, can you hear me? I managed to get through on an emergency medical channel." "Jinho, what is happening?" The AI said there were containment breaches. "It is much worse than that. I'm in the medical bay treating injuries. Senior researcher Vexoth was found in the lower levels. He was barely alive when they brought him here." Jinho's voice was shaking. "Something attacked him, Mirai. Something that left wounds I have never seen before." "What kind of wounds?" "Like he was partially dissolved from the inside. Whatever did this was not just killing him. It was trying to eat him while he was still alive." Mirai had to sit down. She had studied predators from dozens of worlds, but very few creatures killed in such a horrible way. The shadowlings were known to feed on their victims slowly, keeping them alive as long as possible to maintain the freshness of their meal. How many escaped? She asked. We do not know yet. The security systems in Level 5 were completely destroyed. Someone or something broke them from the inside, but there are no signs of explosion or energy weapon damage. It looks like they were torn apart by incredible physical force. The implications of this information hit Mirai like a physical blow. The containment systems in Level 5 were designed to hold creatures that could destroy entire cities. They were built with the strongest materials known to the Coalition and protected by energy fields that could stop starship weapons. Whatever had broken them out possessed strength beyond anything she could imagine. Jinho, we need to get off the station. The escape pods have been damaged. All of them. Whatever did this was very smart. It made sure we could not run away. Mirai felt true fear for the first time in her life. She was trapped on a station with creatures that viewed every other living thing as food. Worse, these creatures were now being controlled or directed by something intelligent enough to plan a systematic attack. Another announcement came through the speakers, but this time it was Korvac's voice instead of the AI. All remaining personnel report to main laboratory complex immediately. We are establishing a defensive position there. Do not travel alone. Stay in groups and move quickly. Mirai gathered her few emergency supplies and prepared to leave her quarters. As she reached for the door control, she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside, but they did not sound right. They were too light and seemed to come from different directions at once. She looked through her window again and saw nothing. But the footsteps continued, moving past her door toward the main laboratory complex. Whatever was making those sounds was invisible to normal sight. Taking a deep breath, Mirai opened her door and stepped into the corridor. The red emergency lights made everything look like it was covered in blood. She began walking quickly toward the laboratory complex, trying not to think about what might be watching her from the shadows. Behind her, something that should not exist began to follow, staying just out of sight but never losing track of its new prey. The gentle scientist who had spent her life protecting alien creatures had no idea that she was about to discover something much more dangerous than any predator in her laboratory, something that lived inside her own human DNA. The journey to the main laboratory complex felt like walking through a nightmare. Mirai moved quickly through corridors that had once felt safe and familiar, but now seemed full of hidden dangers. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows that seemed to move when she was not looking directly at them. She was not alone in the hallways. Other survivors were making their way to the defensive position that Korvac had established. She saw Dr. Kim, a Velkari engineer whose silver skin reflected the red lights in an eerie way. Behind him walked two aquatic Nephilim, their breathing apparatus making soft bubbling sounds as they moved through the air-filled corridors. Dr. Mirai, Kim called out in his musical voice. Have you seen what happened to the security teams? What do you mean? 3 teams went to investigate the containment breaches. Only one member came back. He could not speak properly, just kept saying that his teammates had been taken by the shadows themselves. The group continued moving together, finding safety in numbers. But Mirai noticed something disturbing. Every few minutes she could swear she heard footsteps that did not belong to any of them. Light, almost floating steps that seemed to come from the walls themselves. When they reached the main laboratory complex, they found chaos. The large central room was filled with survivors from all over the station. Humans, Drakmari, Thylorians, Velkari, and others were gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed, frightened voices. Emergency lights had been set up around the room, creating a circle of brightness in the center. Security Chief Korvac stood near a tactical display, studying reports from his remaining teams. His massive frame looked tense and his tusks gleamed in the emergency lighting. When he saw the new arrivals, he gestured for them to join the main group. How many are we now? Asked Dr. Yan, an older human woman who worked in the communications department. 43 survivors, Korvac replied. We started the day with 206 crew members. The numbers hit everyone like a physical blow. In less than 12 hours, something had killed or captured over 160 beings. The station had become a slaughterhouse. What exactly are we dealing with? Jinho asked. He had set up a medical station in one corner and was treating injured survivors. Korvac activated the tactical display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the station. Red areas marked places where the security system had detected combat or disturbance. Nearly half the station was colored red. Shadowlings, he said simply, At least 15 of them, possibly more. They are hunting in coordinated packs, which means something is controlling them. Shadowlings do not naturally work together. Could another specimen be directing them? Mirai asked. Unknown. But whatever is leading them understands our technology and our tactics. They disabled our communication arrays first, then destroyed the escape pods, then began systematic hunting of isolated personnel. As if summoned by their conversation, the lights in the laboratory complex suddenly went out. The emergency lighting failed completely, plunging the room into absolute darkness. In the blackness, Mirai heard a sound that made her soul freeze with terror. Breathing that was not quite breathing. Movement that was not quite movement, and underneath it all a soft sound like liquid dripping onto metal. Nobody move, Korvac whispered in the darkness. They hunt by sensing fear and motion, but someone panicked. One of the Thylorian researchers began to glow with the natural light of his species, trying to see what was happening. The soft blue illumination revealed shapes moving through the laboratory that should not have been there. Shadowlings were everywhere. They moved like liquid darkness given form, flowing between the laboratory equipment and around the huddled survivors. Their bodies seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else, making them nearly impossible to see clearly, even with light. The Thylorian's glow attracted their attention immediately. 3 of the creatures moved toward him with horrible, predatory grace. Their feeding tendrils, normally invisible, became briefly visible in his light as they reached toward their prey. "Zik, turn off your light," someone shouted, but it was too late. The Shadowlings fell upon the Thylorian researcher with terrible efficiency. His scream of pain and terror echoed through the laboratory as the creatures began their feeding process. The sound was unlike anything Mirai had ever heard, a combination of agony and horror that seemed to go on forever. When it finally stopped, the laboratory was silent, except for the sound of the survivors breathing heavily in the darkness. The Thylorians' natural glow was gone, and with it their only source of light. "Emergency power," Korvac called out. "Someone needs to reach the manual controls. Where are they?" Jinho asked. 15 meters to your left, near the main laboratory console. But crossing that distance in the dark, I will go. The voice surprised everyone, including herself. It was Mirai who had spoken. "Mirai, no," Jinho protested. "It is too dangerous. Someone has to do it. I know this laboratory better than anyone else. I can find the controls even in the dark." She began moving before anyone could stop her. In the absolute blackness, she relied on her memory of the laboratory layout and her understanding of the equipment placement. But as she moved, something strange began to happen. Her other senses became sharper. She could hear the subtle sounds of the Shadowlings moving around the room. She could sense the fear radiating from the other survivors. Most importantly, she could feel something awakening deep inside her mind, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. As she reached toward the emergency power controls, a Shadowling moved to intercept her. In the darkness, she should not have been able to see it coming. But somehow she did. For the first time in her life, Dr. Han Mirai felt the stirring of something that was definitely not peaceful or gentle. And as the creature reached for her with its feeding tendrils, she discovered that being afraid was very different from being helpless. The moment the Shadowling reached for her, something fundamental changed inside Mirai's mind. The fear that had gripped her since the crisis began was still there, but it was no longer controlling her thoughts. Instead, it became fuel for something else that was rising from the deepest parts of her consciousness. Her hand moved without conscious thought, striking out at where she somehow knew the creature's central mass would be. Her fingers should have passed harmlessly through its phased form, but instead they made contact with something solid and vital. The Shadowling's shriek of surprise and pain filled the laboratory. "Impossible," Korvac's voice came from the darkness. "Nothing can touch them when they are phased." But Mirai had already moved past the wounded creature, her hand finding the emergency power controls with perfect accuracy, despite the absolute darkness. Light flooded the laboratory as the backup systems activated, revealing a scene that made everyone step back in shock. 15 Shadowlings surrounded the survivors, their dark forms rippling between dimensions as they prepared for a coordinated attack. But something had changed in the few seconds of darkness. The creatures that had been moving with confident predatory grace now seemed hesitant, even confused. They were staring at Mirai. She stood by the power controls, her breathing steady, and her posture completely different from the frightened scientist she had been moments before. Her eyes moved across the laboratory with calculating precision, taking in every detail of their tactical situation. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made even Korvac pay attention. "Veltar, you carry a ceremonial blade. The metal composition includes dimensional phase elements. It can harm them." The Drekmari warrior looked at her with surprise.
"How could you possibly know the metallurgical properties of a sacred weapon?"
"Because I can sense how the metal interacts with their dimensional displacement field." She turned to face the largest shadowling, and something in her gaze made the creature actually retreat slightly. "They are not invisible. They exist partially outside our reality, but they still have mass and energy signatures that can be tracked." Jinho stared at his friend in amazement. "Mirai, how do you know all this?" "I do not know how I know it, but I can see them clearly now. All of them." She pointed to spots around the laboratory where empty space seemed to shimmer slightly. "There are 22 shadowlings in this room, not 15. 7 of them are fully phased and waiting for us to show weakness. The scientific impossibility of a human possessing such knowledge should have been the focus of everyone's attention. But there was no time for questions because the shadowlings had decided to attack. They moved as one, flowing toward the survivors with deadly coordination. But Mirai was already moving too, her hand closing around Veltar's ceremonial blade before the Drekmari could react. The weapon felt familiar in her grip, as if she had been training with similar tools her entire life. The first shadowling that reached her died instantly. The blade cut through its dimensional displacement like it was nothing more than air, severing the creature's connection to whatever realm it used for phasing. Dark fluid sprayed across the laboratory floor as the predator collapsed into normal space, very dead and very solid. But Mirai was not finished. The calm that had settled over her mind was now a focused storm of controlled violence. She moved through the attacking creatures with impossible speed and precision, the ceremonial blade becoming an extension of her will. The other survivors watched in stunned silence as their gentle colleague transformed into something that redefined their understanding of human potential. She fought with a combination of tactical intelligence and savage effectiveness that was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. "She is hunting them," whispered Dr. Kim, his silver skin pale with shock, and he was right. Mirai was not just defending herself or the group. She was systematically tracking down every shadowling in the laboratory, turning their own predatory instincts against them. When one tried to escape through the ventilation system, she anticipated its route and intercepted it. When another attempted to phase into the laboratory equipment for cover, she used the machinery's energy field to trap it in normal space. The transformation was not just physical. Her entire psychology had shifted from protective nurturing to something far more primal. The part of her that had spent years caring for alien life forms was still present, but it had been overwhelmed by a more fundamental human drive to eliminate threats to her pack. Within minutes, the laboratory floor was covered with the remains of creatures that had terrorized dozens of species across multiple star systems. Mirai stood among the bodies, the ceremonial blade still in her hand, breathing normally as if she had just finished a routine task. The silence that followed was broken by Korvac's voice, filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "Dr. Mirai, what just happened to you?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see much more than they had before. "I do not know exactly. Something woke up inside my mind, something that has been sleeping for a long time." Jinho approached her carefully, his medical scanner active. "Your brain chemistry has changed completely. Neural pathway efficiency is up by 400%. Muscle density has increased by 30%. Reaction time is now faster than most military enhancement drugs can achieve." "Is it permanent?" Veltar asked, still staring at his blade that was now covered in dark fluid. "I do not think so," Mirai replied. "I can feel it starting to fade already, like my body cannot maintain this state for very long." But even as she spoke, her enhanced senses were picking up something that made her tense again. Through the walls of the laboratory, she could hear movement in the corridors beyond. Heavy footsteps that belonged to something much larger than shadowlings. "We are not finished," she said quietly. "The shadowlings were just the scouts. Something else is coming, something that has been controlling them." As if summoned by her words, a new sound echoed through the station, a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once, filled with intelligence and hunger and the promise of violence beyond anything they had yet experienced. The real monster had finally decided to reveal itself, and even with her awakened abilities, Mirai was not sure she would be strong enough to face what was coming. The roar that echoed through the station was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, a sound so deep and powerful that it made the metal floor vibrate under their feet. Whatever was making that noise was much larger and more dangerous than the shadowlings. Mirai felt the awakened part of her mind analyzing the sound automatically. The creature was somewhere in the lower levels, probably near the main power core. It was big enough to use the station's own structure as a resonating chamber for its vocalizations. Most importantly, it was intelligent enough to be calling to them deliberately. "It wants us to know it is there," she said, her voice still carrying that new authority that made everyone listen. "This is psychological warfare. It is trying to make us afraid before it attacks." Korvac checked his tactical display, but most of the sensors in the lower levels had been destroyed. "Can you sense it the same way you sensed the shadowlings?" Mirai closed her eyes and concentrated. The enhanced awareness that had awakened during the fight was still active, though she could feel it beginning to fade. Through the station's structure, she could perceive something massive moving through the corridors below them. "It is in Research Level 7, she said, near the primary specimen containment area. "It is not just one creature. There are several entities down there, but they are working together." "Several entities?" Jinho asked. "You mean there are more prisoners that escaped?" "No. I think these creatures were never prisoners at all. I think they have been hiding on this station for a long time, waiting for the right moment to attack." The implications of this statement sent a chill through the survivors. If Mirai was right, then the station had been infiltrated weeks or months ago. The containment breaches might have been planned from the beginning, designed to create chaos while the real predators moved into position. Another roar echoed through the facility, closer this time. Whatever was making the sound was climbing toward their level. "We need to move," Korvac said. "This position is too exposed." "Where can we go?" Dr. Yan asked. "The escape pods are destroyed. Communications are down, and these things seem to know the station better than we do." Mirai was studying the laboratory's layout with her enhanced perception. Even as her abilities began to fade, she could still see tactical possibilities that had been invisible to her before. "The central core," she said. "If we can reach the station's main computer core, we might be able to send a distress signal or activate the self-destruct sequence." "Self-destruct?" Kim's silver skin had gone completely pale. "You want to destroy the station?" "It might be the only way to stop these things from reaching other worlds. If they can infiltrate and take over a coalition research station, they can probably do the same thing to populated planets." The logic was harsh but undeniable. The station contained detailed information about coalition defenses, trade routes, and military capabilities. In the wrong hands, that data could be used to plan attacks that would devastate entire star systems. "The core is 15 levels below us," Korvac said. "We would have to travel through areas that are probably crawling with hostiles." "I can get us there," Mirai replied with confidence that surprised everyone, including herself. "But we need to move now, while I can still sense their positions." The group gathered their emergency supplies and prepared to leave the relative safety of the laboratory. As they organized themselves for the dangerous journey, Mirai felt the enhanced awareness in her mind flickering like a candle in the wind. Whatever had awakened inside her was not meant to last very long. They moved out in a tight formation, with Korvac's remaining security personnel at the front and rear. Mirai walked just behind the lead group, her senses straining to detect threats in the corridors ahead. The ceremonial blade was still in her hand, and she found herself checking its weight and balance automatically. The first part of their journey went smoothly. They encountered signs of the earlier battles, damaged walls and floors covered with dark stains, but no active threats. But as they descended toward the middle levels of the station, Mirai began to sense something following them. "We are being tracked," she whispered to Korvac. "Something large is paralleling our route through the maintenance shafts." "Can you tell what it is?" "No, it is too well hidden, but it is definitely intelligent and definitely predatory." They continued downward, passing through sections of the station that had been heavily damaged in the earlier attacks. Entire laboratories had been torn apart, not by explosions or energy weapons, but by incredible physical force. Whatever had done this possessed strength that could bend titanium support beams like soft metal. When they reached Research Level 5, where the original containment breaches had occurred, they found something that made everyone stop in shock. The entire level had been converted into something that looked like a nest or hive. The walls were covered with a dark organic substance that pulsed with its own internal light. The air was thick with a sweet, sickly smell that made everyone gag. "This is not random destruction," Jinho said, his medical scanner detecting biological activity throughout the area. "This is construction. They are building something." Mirai's enhanced senses were screaming warnings at her. The organic material on the walls was not just decoration. It was some kind of sensory network, designed to detect any intruders who entered the area. "We cannot go through here," she said. "The entire level is one giant trap." But even as she spoke, she realized they had no choice. The main access routes to the lower levels all passed through this area. The creatures had chosen their construction site carefully, forcing any survivors to come to them. "There is another way," Veltar said quietly. "The emergency maintenance tunnels run outside the main station structure. They are not pleasant, but they bypass this level completely." "Those tunnels were not designed for beings our size," Korvac protested. "It would be a difficult journey." "Difficult is better than impossible," Mirai replied. But even as she agreed to the plan, her enhanced awareness was fading rapidly. Soon she would be back to her normal human limitations, and the journey ahead would become much more dangerous. As they prepared to enter the maintenance tunnels, another roar echoed through the station. This time it was answered by several other voices, creating a chorus of predatory sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The real hunt was about to begin, and Mirai could feel her temporary advantages slipping away with each passing minute. The maintenance tunnels were a nightmare of cramped spaces and mechanical hazards. The group had to crawl through sections that were barely wide enough for a human, while pipes carrying superheated gases hissed dangerously close to their heads. But the route worked. They bypassed the infected level and continued their descent toward the station's core. Mirai felt her enhanced abilities fading with each passing hour. The incredible awareness that had allowed her to detect and fight the shadowlings was becoming weaker, like a radio signal slowly losing strength. Soon she would be back to her normal human limitations, and the thought terrified her more than she wanted to admit. When they finally emerged from the maintenance tunnels, they were only 3 levels above the central core, but they had also lost valuable time, and Mirai could sense that their pursuers had used that time to get ahead of them. "They are waiting for us," she told Korvac as they prepared to enter the core access corridors. "Multiple contacts positioned to ambush us as soon as we move toward the main computer systems." "How many?" Mirai concentrated, trying to squeeze the last bit of perception from her fading abilities. "At least 6 large entities, plus something else, something that feels different from the others." "Different how?" "More intelligent, more focused. I think it might be their leader." The group took defensive positions while Korvac studied the layout of the core levels. The central computer was housed in a heavily shielded chamber that could only be accessed through 2 corridors. Both routes were obviously monitored by their enemies. "We need a distraction," Jinho said, "something to draw them away from the core entrance." "I will go," Mirai said quietly. "Absolutely not," Korvac replied immediately. "You are the only one who can sense their positions. We need you with the main group. My abilities are almost gone. In another hour, I will be no more useful than any other human. But right now I might still be able to do something that matters." Before anyone could stop her, Mirai was moving. She slipped away from the group and headed toward the secondary corridor that led to the core chamber. The ceremonial blade felt heavy in her hand, its weight reminding her that she was no longer the superhuman fighter she had been in the laboratory. As she moved through the darkened corridors, her fading senses picked up movement all around her. The creatures were repositioning themselves to intercept her, just as she had hoped. With luck, this would give the others a clear path to the core. The first attack came from above. Something dropped from the ceiling with incredible speed. But Mirai's reflexes, though diminished, were still faster than human normal. She rolled aside and struck upward with the blade, feeling it connect with something solid and vital. The creature that crashed to the floor was unlike anything she had seen before. It was roughly humanoid but covered in the same dark, organic material that had been growing on the walls. Its face was a nightmare combination of features from different species, as if it had been assembled from parts of various victims. More creatures emerged from the shadows around her. She counted 5 of them, each one a horrible fusion of organic and technological components. They moved with predatory grace but also with obvious intelligence, coordinating their attacks to cut off her escape routes. Mireille fought with everything she had left, using the last remnants of her enhanced abilities to stay ahead of their coordinated assault. But she could feel herself slowing down with each exchange. Her reflexes were returning to normal human levels, and the creatures were adapting to her tactics. Just when she thought she would be overwhelmed, she heard the sound of energy weapons firing from the direction of the core chamber. Korvac and his team had reached their objective and were engaging the remaining hostiles, but her distraction had worked too well. The creatures attacking her were no longer interested in capturing or feeding. They wanted to kill her quickly so they could return to defend their leader. Their attacks became more desperate and more dangerous. The end came suddenly. One of the creatures managed to get past her guard and struck her with a blow that sent her flying into the corridor wall. The ceremonial blade skittered away across the floor and she felt ribs crack from the impact. As she struggled to get back to her feet, she saw something that made her blood freeze. The largest of the creatures was approaching her slowly, its horrible hybrid face twisted into what might have been a smile. It spoke using a voice that was clearly artificial but horribly effective. "The human female who killed our scouts. You have caused us considerable inconvenience." Mireille tried to reach for the fallen blade, but another creature kicked it further away. She was trapped, injured, and facing enemies that were stronger and faster than anything she could handle in her weakened state. "Your species has potential," the creature continued. "We have observed your transformation abilities with great interest. Perhaps we can find a use for you in our expansion plans." "Never," Mireille gasped, tasting blood in her mouth. "We shall see." But before the creature could reach her, a new sound echoed through the corridor. The station's self-destruct system had been activated. Korvac and the others had reached the core and made the hard choice to destroy everything, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The creature's artificial smile faded as it realized what was happening. Unacceptable. The research data must be preserved. It began moving toward the core chamber, abandoning Mireille in its urgency to stop the destruction sequence. The other creatures followed, leaving her alone in the damaged corridor. With great effort, she managed to crawl to where the ceremonial blade had fallen. As her fingers closed around its handle, she felt a faint echo of the power that had awakened in her during the crisis. Not enough to fight these creatures again, but enough to do one last important thing. The emergency communication system was still functional. Using her knowledge of the station's systems, she managed to send a message that would reach Coalition Command. A warning about what they had discovered and what they had been forced to do. When the rescue ships arrived 3 days later, they found a station that had been completely destroyed by its own self-destruct sequence. The official report stated that a containment breach had resulted in multiple casualties and the loss of the facility. But Mireille's message had been received and understood. New protocols were established for research stations. Better security measures were implemented. And somewhere in the classified files of Coalition intelligence, a report existed about humans who could transform into something far more dangerous than their peaceful appearance suggested. Dr. Han Mireille survived her injuries and returned to research work. But she was never quite the same. She had learned something important about her own species during those terrible hours on Meridian Station. Humans were not just another member species in the galactic community. They were something much more significant. They were the answer to threats that conventional civilization could not handle. They were the monsters that peaceful species needed when darkness came calling in the vastness of space. And though she seemed as pure and gentle as ever when she returned to her work with alien life forms, those who knew what had happened on Meridian Station understood that beneath her calm exterior, something powerful was always watching and waiting, ready to awaken again when the galaxy needed its guardians to show their true nature.